Today, guys, a little bit different of a video. Kind of talking about this, my 1967 Porsche 912 with a 1976 912E Type 4 2-liter out and back. Had to do some suspension work or suspension pan work to the front of the car. Had to weld in a new pan and a new gas tank support. Just having a cigar and enjoying the fruits of my labor in a sense, and wanted to give you guys an opportunity to see what I have done and kind of give you some history, some backstory on this car as we move forward and we start to do more videos on this car, getting it spruced up. So if you're a Porsche early short wheelbase or long wheelbase 911, 912 fan, or you own one, keep watching, because we're going to start doing more and more videos on restoring this car on our video series here on YouTube. So let's stop the chit chat, let's get the puffing, and let's get into this video. Hit that subscribe button too to see more. Alright guys, so this video here is of the suspension pan underneath my 1967 Porsche 912, which is the same thing as a 911 of the same generation. This is before I started doing YouTube, so this is all I have of this part of it. So you can see how bad the rust is, and I later found out while doing this that this was the not original, but someone else had already been in there before me and put in a replacement pan. So now I'm going to have to put in the third replacement pan. So I didn't record any of the welding of the suspension pan into the car. We were in the middle of a move and I knew I just had to weld it in as quickly as I possibly could in order to move the car to our new house. And I never got around to finally welding in the gas tank support, which is the third part when you redo a pan on a Porsche 911 or 912. There's the actual pan that you saw first, and then there's the little supports that go over on top of the bolts, and then there's this pan that goes on top of both of those. And so this video here, I'm just gonna kind of walk through a little bit about this car, introduction to the car while I'm welding and doing some things. So it's not really a DIY on how to weld in this piece. It's probably a little bit beyond a DIYer. If you're learning how to weld, absolutely go to Harbor Freight, buy that $125 welder, and practice with it. Weld stuff up. Go on YouTube, find little projects that you can weld on to kind of get your skill level down. Definitely, but I used the Harbor Freight welder on this project and it worked well. It wasn't perfect, but it did the job and took care of things. So there's the new puppy, Sierra Madre. And all I'm doing right here is I'm just kind of making sure that that new panel fits where it needs to. And that's going to be with any kind of sheet metal that you buy for your Porsche. It's going to need to be formed to your car. Because remember, these cars were always built by hand. So Hans and Franz over in Germany back in the 60s were doing exactly what I was doing for each individual car. So it's nothing new. So you need to get in there and make some adjustments. So when I bought this car, purchased it back in the summer of 2005 out of California. And when I picked it up, a lot of people know the story, it had no glass, no engine, no transmission, no headlights, no seats, no nothing, not even a key. And the driver's side door wouldn't even stay shut. I had to actually duct tape the door closed on the trailer in order to get it home. And it didn't even have rims. I had to go out and buy 4 mixed matched rims just to put on this car in order to get it onto the trailer in order to get it home. And it was about a 9-hour drive to get it back up to Pine Top, Arizona, which is where we were living at the time. And so it was a challenge all in and of itself. So drove it around for a little bit until it was time to sand it down and start doing some painting work on it and some rust repair on the top part of the shell. It had quite a bit of Bondo on it. Matter of fact, behind the driver's door, that little panel underneath the rear window on the driver's side, looked like someone shot it with a shotgun. And hopefully I'm not blowing your eardrums out here. All I'm doing now is trimming up this gas tank support using a grinder. Unfortunately, the head cam that I have on didn't quite hit where I needed to, so but I'm just trimming it up, taking off some metal to where it needs to in order to fit this correctly onto the car. Um, so the car, so when I started noticing just little things about the front end and how it was riding, and that's when I investigated that very first video we saw with how the actual A-arm was not even really attached to the body anymore. It was completely rusted out and it was just kind of free-flowing. And it's not that hard of a job to cut out the old pan and put it in. Common sense, or at least mechanical common sense, and auto body. But it it's doable. Take your time, watch a ton of videos on this, and you can get through it. But so once I had the car, I started using my contacts because I worked for Nine Magazine. That's a Porsche magazine at the time. And I sourced an engine, I sourced a transmission. I went to Hershey, Pennsylvania to the big Hershey meet every year. So on one of my trips out there, after I picked up the car, I bought things that I needed, like headlights and whatnot. Just little things that I needed to put the car back together. What I'm doing here now is I'm drilling holes into the gas tank support. Now, I do have one of the air punches that will punch the holes into the metal. And the last time I used that, the holes were just way too small to really weld. So I use a 5/8" drill bit, and I just took my time. I put the piece in my vise on my new bench, and I just went around the perimeter drilling holes where I needed to in order to weld this thing in and make it secure. I'll probably use that punch again, but my air compressor is down at the moment, and I really want to get this done because I'm going to be rebuilding the entire front suspension on my car. So I've got it clamped down. I'm just, as you can see in this right here, I'm just drilling holes about every inch or so around the perimeter where it's going to attach to the top part of the pan and the body there. So back to the story. It took probably about 9 months to get everything I needed in order to put the car back on the road and get it registered and insured and start driving it. And I drove it for about 1.5 years or so, as is, with the motor as it was in there. And then I went into this phase of wanting to sand down the entire car. It was rattle can black. Original color of this car was a canary yellow, but someone along the way had rattle can blacked the entire car. Like everything. Over the chrome, everything was just painted black. So, needless to say, I spent a summer sanding down to bare metal this entire car and discovering what 30, 40 years worth of previous owners had done to the car with Bondo and mismatch things. Did have to replace the passenger front fender. It was so eaten up by rust, there was no repair to it. It had to be replaced. Along its life, this car had to have a new front hood, and it also has a different non-original rear deck lid for the motor. So the history of this car, I'm not 100% sure of what happened, but it definitely had a life before me. Here, I'm just kind of grinding down the welds from when I put the pan in the first time. You can kind of see that copper streak right there in the green. That's where I welded it. Here, I'm just making sure I have shiny metal to weld to. Just making my rounds, getting it as shiny as I can before I put the gas tank support brace down and start welding in. And so I kind of was going through a transition in my life about the time I was sanding down this car. and happened to make a deal with somebody to do some trade. They needed some work done, and they were a body shop, so they said, "I know, we'll paint your Porsche." So I took a gamble, and I needed a place to put the car. I was in transition in life at that point. So they took the car and they held on to it for like 4 years. And it took me just pushing and pushing and pushing to be like, look, I did my part. I did the first part of the trade. Now it's kind of your part now to finish painting it. So eventually we got around to them painting it. Not the color I wanted. I wanted to go to a black color, but they talked me out of black because they were like, oh, black's going to be way too hard to make look perfect. And I never really wanted a show car. I just wanted a car I could daily drive. So here I'm using some weld through primer. It's a copper color. So I'm just basically going through and hitting all the areas that I'm going to be welding on, plus protecting the what's going to be covered up by the gas tank support. So once it's welded on, I'm not going to be able to get in there to do anything to it. Now there are a few holes, as you can kind of see, that I could probably put a tube up in there from underneath and spray some oil in there, or some kind of anti-rust or whatever. But went ahead and made sure that I completely covered the area below where I'm going to be welding on this support bracket for the gas tank. So I got the car back from the paint shop. I dropped it off probably in like 2010, 11. And I picked it up in about this, probably like May, April of 2016. So like I said, they had it for 4 or 5 years and just drug their feet on it. And again, he just opened up a shop. He was a young guy, and I was willing to take a gamble. So he did paint the car. He did do body work to the car. Didn't do anything on the bottom, just on the top. And he did a fairly okay job, not a great job. There's orange peel and the paint's cracking in a few places, but nonetheless, I can deal with it for now. Again, not a show car, so I'm not too worried about it. Plus, I have plans to sand this car down myself and paint it myself black eventually, probably the next 5 to 6 years. But back to the video here. So here I'm kind of, once again, doing another placement, just kind of making sure I have it all lined up the way I want to. Making sure I don't have to make any last minute corrections to the pan to nail on it. Alright, so just kind of making sure everything is in place, and I'm starting my welding. You can see my ground clamp is on there. And again, Harbor Freight welder, sure, it's a flux core welder. I didn't use the flux core that came with it. I actually did some research, and there's another brand that I bought off of Amazon that was much better, and I've actually come to like using this flux core welder. It's quick, it's easy, it's portable. I can get in and do what I need to. It did take a lot of time to figure out how to weld with it, but again, do little projects, find stuff around the house to weld, just make projects, find projects on YouTube. And again, with welding, you kind of want to hit one spot and then move to a opposite area of the pan. That way you don't put too much heat in one area too fast. So kind of jumping around, bouncing around, hitting the spots as I can for this suspension pan. Kind of a cool thing, it has the battery tray already welded onto it. My last pan didn't even have that. So my battery was just kind of like flinging around. So at least now I have a point where I can kind of strap my battery down finally to make me feel a little bit more secure when I'm driving. So again, kind of just moving around, moving that clamp, kind of keeping everything down while I'm welding. So when I got the car back from the paint guy, he left it sit outside for most of the time until I was bugging him to paint it. And in doing so, I had pulled the carb. At the time, it had a progressive single carb on it that ran the Type 4 2-liter, and the engine actually came out of a 76 912E. Again, just my contacts back in the day when I worked for the Porsche magazine, found a guy who pulled out his original 912E Type 4 2-liter motor to replace it with something else, and he's like, yeah, it's just in the corner here, give me $1,000 for it, and it's yours. Deals like that, and today in 2020, yeah, a rebuilt Type 4 today is just as much as almost a rebuilt 3.4 996 M96 motor. It's like 15 grand for it to be done right. Um, so, anyways, I get the car back from the paint shop, and it's beautiful and it looks nice and blah 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 blah. But however, they had left the car sit outside this entire time with no windows in it because I went ahead and stripped it all so they could, do their body work and paint it. And I'd pulled the carb and I'd put tape on the intake of the heads, but unfortunately with snow up in Pine Top, Arizona in the mountains, obviously snow got in and the tape didn't hold and water got down with the crank and it wouldn't even turn over. I couldn't even move it by hand when I got the car back. So needless to say, I pulled the engine out and my buddy Don Jackson up at Don Jackson Enterprises in North Phoenix, he needed some stuff done with his daughter's wedding, and so we made a deal, and he rebuilt my 1976 912E Type 4 2-liter. In return, I helped him out with his daughter's wedding. And so we kind of did some trading there. And now that motor is running beautifully, I have about 3,000 miles on it in this car, and I love it. I love the Type 4 motor in this vehicle. So as you can see, I'm just kind of bouncing around, welding, hitting spots as I go, trying to make sure I move around enough to where I don't spend too much time in one area, and getting it down. What else can I tell you about this car? I actually was looking for the aluminum trim that goes along the dash on these early 911 and 912s, and I was missing some aluminum pieces. And I have it on Craigslist. This was like 2006, and this kid, had another 67 912 Coupe that he was parting out, and he had the aluminum dash that I needed. And so I cruised down to his house and went to buy the aluminum trim off him for $40, and it had an engine fire, and it had the original 616 motor, and I was just kind of asking him, like what, how much do you want for the whole car? Obviously it had stuff that I needed more than just the aluminum dash, and the guy's like, I don't know, give me $1,000 for it, and Shores. And it had the Fuchs, the 5-inch Fuchs on it, and I went with the wheels alone, or $1,000 right there back in those days. And so it took everything in me to get to the bank as fast as I could, give him $1,000, went and rented a U-Haul trailer, hooked it up to the truck, and I towed that 67 912 back up to my house in Pine Top from Phoenix, and I just began to grab parts from it. Sold the motor to Autos over in California for him to rebuild. I pulled obviously the rims, the Fuchs, off of that. I pulled the seats, I believe, out of that car and a few other things. And then I sold the body off to another guy who wanted the body to build into a race car for POC stuff. So it all went to good use. But so this car has so much history, has so much blood, sweat, and tears. It's been with me through the last couple chapters of my life, which have probably been the best chapters, I would say, of my life. But it is the one Porsche that I've kept the longest. Most of the Porsches I would buy, have for a year or two, fix them up, and then sell them, buy another one, fix them up, sell them, and kind of do that whole game. This car came along, and this is a car that I had wanted for a while, and I'd searched and searched and searched, and I always told I want a 912. I want that, 4-cylinder out back, kind of a paying respect to the 356 at the time, and just happened to find someone on the 912 registry who was selling the car, and that's kind of how. But I had to have a short wheelbase, and it had to be a coupe. Didn't want a Targa. I had already owned a 74 911 Targa, so I wanted a coupe, definitely, for that. Alright, let me pound in here real quick a few more little spots on this. Good. So the car, again, like I said, it's been a work in progress. It didn't have a working speedo for a very long time. And I, just as time would happen, I have a day off from work, have a few dollars, I'd buy a part, put it together, and hook it up. I think the biggest thing, or the one thing that most people ask me about, are when they find out that it does not have the original motor, and they're like, wait a minute, you have like a 914 motor in there, a Type 4, a Volkswagen Type 4 that came out of the VW bus? Like, how did that happen? How does that work? Um, it just so happens that the flywheel on a Type 4 mounts up to the early 901 transmission with no modifications. It bolts right up. Now, there is a big difference in the gearing for a 901 transmission when it comes to either a 6-cylinder 911 motor and a 4-cylinder 356 or 616 motor, and when it comes to the Type 4 motor. So I actually, back in the day when I first got this car, um, bought a transmission from a 914 and then took my 901 5-speed transmission and went over to California. And the guy that I had my inspiration from in this, Tony Bray, who had the Gumby car, the Porsche 912 Gumby car, and in an afternoon on a Saturday, we pulled the gears out of the 914, and essentially, first, second, and third gear out of the 914 transmission came over to the 901 transmission, and then we left gears 4 and 5 because they have the right ratios for the Type 4 as well as the 616 motor that originally came with the car. So we switched out gears 1, 2, and 3 out of the 914. Alright, let me get back to the video here for a minute, kind of jumping around. As you can see, I'm up inside the cavity where the gas tank would fit, doing some more welding, and kind of interesting how the camera reacts to the welder. It's kind of cool to watch. So, so the big thing is that with the transmission, if you keep the stock 901 gears in this car when you install a Type 4 transmission, it's going to rev insanely high. It's going to be like $3 to $4 grand while driving the car in first, second, and third gears. So having those lower gears definitely helps when doing this Type 4 conversion on this car. So it looks like I've finished welding, and now I'm going back through and just kind of grinding down my welds. So hopefully your eardrums don't get blown out by all this, and at least you get to watch some pretty sparks happening. So then there's there's 3 different Type 4 motors. There's the 1.7 Type 4 that came in the early 914s. Then they came out with a 1.8 a little bit later on towards the end, and of course the 2-liter. The 2-liter is the most desirable motor for the car. Obviously, it has the most power. It's overall just a better engine. Has redesigned or reworked heads as compared to the 1.7s and 1.8 Type 4s. So the other couple issues here then is how to mount the engine to the car. So traditionally the 911 would mount towards the very back near the bumper with its left and right supports, and then a 912 motor, original 616 or the 356 motor, would mount a few inches inward from where the 912 mounted, and there's special little mounts that are welded in when the 912 was built. So a 914 motor has a mount bar that stretches out like beyond the engine bay of a typical 911 912. So what you have to do is you either have to fabricate a custom bar to support the engine in the engine bay of a 911 or 912. And again, I didn't have to because the motor I bought came out of a 1976 912E. So all I needed were the brackets that were originally on a 912 that will hold the engine support bar to the body or to the frame of the car. So I called my friends up at Oklahoma Foreign. I think it's in Moore, Oklahoma. It's a Porsche junkyard, and they happen to have a wrecked 912E. And for $100 or so, they cut out those brackets, sent them to me, and I simply just welded in those brackets where they needed to go on the frame of my 67 912. So when I put the motor up, the factory bracket for the 912E Type 4 just lined up perfectly, and in went my bolts, and away we went. So, you have your transmission needs to be re-geared. You then have the whole mounting the engine to the car. So that's your engine support bracket, and again, you can custom make it or go with, like I did, find an original 912E to put in there. The last major thing that you need in order to facilitate putting a Type 4 into a early 911 or 912 is the cooling tin. And again, 1976, that motor had the correct tin that fit the correct opening of the engine bay. So I got lucky with that motor having the tin already with the motor when I bought it. It simply just went right up in there. If you don't have the tin, and I believe the last time I checked, the tin alone for this motor to replace it was right around, I think, like $1,500 to $2,000 for the engine tin. Now that's been a few years now since I've taken the time to kind of research what the engine tin would cost from an original 1976 912E. Remember, they only built 2,099 912Es in 1976, so a one-year only car. Trying to find that tin and getting lucky like I did, pretty slim chances. But guys like Jake Raby in the Type 4 store, they sell what they call a down-the-middle cooling design kit, which kind of gives your Type 4 that 911 look with the big fan in the middle. And that way you don't have to have all the special tin to put a Type 4 into an early 911 or 912 body or chassis. So that's something to go with if you're considering this project. When I did my Type 4 conversion on this 912, back in 2006, these parts were cheap. Again, I bought the motor for $1,000 running, and I drove it for years with that stock 2-liter motor in there before I had it rebuilt. And again, today, I don't think you can even put your hands on one of these motors for probably less than 8, 9, 10 grand for a Type 4 out of a 912E, just because of the rarity of them. But it doesn't mean you can't go and pick up a Type 4 2-liter bus motor, and you can't fabricate your own bracket and weld it up into the car, and grab the down-the-middle cooling kit from Jake Raby and install that on your car and enjoy it. I'm not sure what a cost of a 616 motor today would be if you had to buy one outright, or if you bought a 912 that had that motor in it to have it rebuilt. I would assume would probably be in the same ballpark, $10, $15, $20,000 to have a 616 rebuilt. But if you can find a Type 4 motor out of a bus, Vita bus, for let's say $2 or $3 grand, and then you can spend another $2 or $3 grand having the motor mount fabricated, and then buying a 914 transmission to grab those gears for first, second, and third gear, and then Jake Raby's Type 4 store down the middle cooling tin. You could probably add a Type 4 motor to your 911 or 912. I would say probably in the $5,000-$6,000 range, so about half what it would take to put in an original 616 motor today. So back to the video. I've grinded down all my welds. Now I just came in with some seam sealer and made sure that I covered up all my seams from welding. I do not want to have to do this again, hopefully ever. Maybe the next person that buys this car after I'm dead and gone in 30, 40 years, whatever, they may have to do it again. But as long as I have it, I didn't want to have to do it again. So I took my time, and I probably used a little too much seam sealer. But knowing that this was the third front suspension pan replacement, so the original, then somebody along the way replaced it once, then this is the second replacement, so it's had 3 in it. I was trying to take all the precautions I possibly could to make sure that while this car will not spend its days and nights out in the snow and rain ever again unless it has to, if I'm on a trip or something, definitely want to take as many precautions as I could to save this car from any more rust or deterioration down the road. So let me put this seam sealer in here, kind of go from there and let that smooth it out and over. So yeah, between the transmission regearing, the motor mount, and the engine cooling tin, those are your big 3 in order to get this motor into an early 911, 912. Then it's just the mechanical fuel pump, and that's easy to wire in and hook up to your fuel system. It does use the standard 914 alternator, so you do need to grab a 914 voltage regulator, and you can pop that on the side of the engine bay and run your wires that way down to the starter. It's actually a pretty clean installation. Alright, I just want to jump back here. You can see I'm just kind of smoothing in and smearing, making sure I get all the welds and the seams where the new panel meets up with the old panel, just to make sure there's watertight. So down the road, if go through a mud puddle or whatever, through snow if I have to, if I'm up skiing up north or snowshoeing, that I can relatively be comfortable with. Everything's going to stay dry and hopefully not rust as much as it possibly can. What else can I tell you about the car? I've redone the seats. I pulled out the bottom cage, the springs. I put the typical... Alright guys, we now have the gas tank support panel welded in, and I went ahead and seam sealed everything in after I grinded down the welds, and we've let this dry overnight. Now we're going to shoot some undercoating on this, kind of clean up our area here, and we'll see how this looks when we're done. So let's grab that undercoating and let's get spraying. So this is what I've been using, this Rust-Oleum Undercoat Pro Grade. I bought several cans of this on Amazon a few months back when I started this project. And we're going to shake this up and go ahead and get all that protected and covered up so we don't have to worry about it anymore. Let's grab that now. Well, let's take a look at how this all turned out. Now it's still drying, but I think we got this pretty much protected and it is solid. I actually stood up in there and put all my weight. I'm 225 pounds and there was no flexing, no movement. So I think we've done an excellent job of getting that piece welded in and seam sealed it all up and then shot it. And of course, once the tank goes in, I'm going to clean up some more of this. By the time I'm done, get the tank in, get everything hooked back up. I think it's going to look pretty freaking sweet. Alright, well, we've done a good job. I think it's time to end this video. Thanks everyone for checking it out.